welcome everyone to our talk on lies, crimes and statistics, I think we've called it. I should know. So what I'm doing, I'm starting off today. I'm Heather Arnold. I used to be a local history librarian here at Case Kidinia Libraries, but I have an interest in local and family history. I'll present just 3 websites, and then Jane Rivet-Karnak, who is the president of the Narre and District Family History Group, will then talk about lots of interesting websites to do with crime and criminals. So I'll share my screen. I'm talking, as I said, just about 3 websites. I'm starting with Statistical Registers of Victoria. So the Statistical Register of the Colony of Victoria is like the Victorian yearbooks from 1874 to 1900. And they include things like the usual yearbook things: population, finance, vital statistics, births, deaths and marriages, etc., law, crime, and my favourite category, religious, moral and intellectual progress. This is the Statistical Register of the Colony of Victoria. You've just heard me talk about that. So we're just going to look at a few examples of what you actually find here. And I've looked at the 1876 register, which is here. And what am I looking at here? So just some of the interesting things, apart from population, other interesting things you might find on this, on page 309, is the, let me just move this away. Is this here, shipping records. So it's hard to believe, of course, that Victoria was once a colony. So this is an example of all the ships that, the number of ships that entered each port in the colony of Victoria, including Melbourne, Geelong, Portland, Port Fairy, Port Albert, Warrnambool, Bigamy, Echuca, Swan Hill, Corowa and Narang. So, of course, because we were a colony, the ships that entered the river ports of Echuca, Swan Hill, etc., are included here as well. So they're just some interesting sort of statistics that if you come from any of these towns, you might want to include these statistics in, say, your local history stories here. And not wishing to take anything away from Jane, they have these interesting statistics on crime. So this is and if you're doing this site yourself, I apologise, Jane, but I did come across this, results of commitment. So in 1876, one boy between 10 and 15 years of age was sent to trial, and he was actually sentenced to be whipped once. Hard to believe now, of course, that you would whip a child, whip anyone really. Hard to believe that you'd whip a child between 10 to 15, but this is what happened in 1876. So that's just another interesting statistic. The religious, moral and intellectual progress is one of my favourite categories. And that includes statistics on, we'll just scroll down here, on things like number of churches in Victoria, number of schools, the National Gallery, number of paintings they actually acquired that year, public libraries and mechanics institutes. And the public libraries and mechanics institutes is an interesting category. If we go to this here, so this is a return for all mechanics institutes in Victoria. So here's the Berwick Mechanics Institute, one of the oldest mechanics institutes in Victoria, and tells you, some of them actually, some later years tells you the year it was established, but this one here tells you it was built for £75, and then it has 2,443 volumes. Tells you the opening hours and the number of visits per annum. So they're just interesting statistics about your local Mechanics Institute, many of which are still in existence, and that you might want to once again add to a local history of the area. If you go to the 1880 Statistical Register on page 20, you'll find some the names of all the commanding officers of the local military forces. So once again, you might find an ancestor there. So this is Captain Martin, who was the commanding officer of the Metropolitan Troop of Cavalry, or Major Ryland here. He was in charge of the Castlemaine Troop. So these are just various names of people who you may or may not be related to. But once again, if you are related to it, it just adds an interesting fact about your ancestor that you can write about in your local histories. And in 1890, the Statistical Register, if we go to page 175, they have this whole list of officers of the Victorian Public Service. It's it goes on for page after page after page. So anyone who worked in the public service in 1890 in Victoria is listed in this annual report. Once again, maybe one of your relatives. So Department of Health, Treasury, Penal, Railways, Post Office, Law, the Asylum Department, Public Works Department, you name it, they're all listed here. Like from the most junior library, from the most junior officer right through to the heads of the department, all listed here. And the type of information you might find out about them is here. I've chosen a page just for you, Jane, just totally at random. And here is the Public Works Department, and it mentions someone called Carlo Catani. Hard to believe I would have chosen him as an example. And oops, the daisy, move him across. I've got so many things. Right, so this is what it tells you. Carlo Catani tells you their date of birth, 28th of April, 1852, that he's an assistant engineer, and that his role is to prepare plans, etc., for harbours, jetties and coastal works. It tells you the year that they joined the public service, how many years they've been in the public service, and their salary as well. So these are just the sort of examples of information that you can find in the statistical registers that you can use for, in this case, family history, but also there's information there that you can use for local history as well. Now, the next thing we'll look at are the Commonwealth yearbooks. So the URL I've sent to Michelle, she'll pass it around to everyone. And if you go to past and future releases, you can access all these yearbooks that go back to 1908. So now I'm just going to go to my PowerPoint presentation for this one here. Right, can you see my PowerPoint presentation? I assume you can. Oops, I'll quickly scroll through there to this one. Right, so the sort of things you can find. Heather. Sorry?
Can't see it yet.
Can't see it, can't find my.
We're just with you at the moment, your lovely face.
Oh, gosh, aren't you lucky? Gosh, hang on. Share screen. Right, can you see a PowerPoint presentation now?
Yep, you just start your slideshow.
From current slide. Okay.
Oh, good, thank you.
Right, so so this is the Commonwealth yearbooks have all these normal statistics like, finance, demographics, vital statistics, everything like that. But I was going to show you an example of how you can use the statistics in the Commonwealth yearbook in your own family story. So I was born 1959, and if you, and in the yearbook from 1961, it had all information about 1959 babies, and that's me. So I was born 1959 amongst the 226,000 babies born that year. And I was one of the single births. I wasn't one of the 66 sets of triplets that were born that year. And and I was one of the 110,000 girls that was born that year. And I have 3 boy cousins also born 1959. So they were part of the 116,000 boys that year. So I thought that was an interesting, quirky fact. There was also, tells you the how many sets of triplets there were here, and how many babies were born in ex-nuptial, as in, out of marriage. Of course, no one cares about that anymore, but in the olden days, people did care a bit about that. So it tells you how many babies are born, within wedlock and without and out of wedlock. Another set of interesting statistics you can find from the yearbooks is the age of parents. So my mum was 24, my father was 25 when I was born. And you can see pretty much here the age of the father, he was 25, was pretty typical. 66,000 other men were also became fathers in 1959. And of the mum, my mum was 24. So she was 22,000 mothers were also, nearly 23,000 other women also gave birth in the same age range as my mum. There was two poor girls gave birth under the age of 15. And, so there's some other statistics there, but they're sort of interesting statistics. So in the end, my parents were fairly typical. I was the second child in my family, and they were fairly typical sort of all the of parents who were born, of parents who gave birth. 45 and even worse, 426 mothers gave birth over the age of 45. They must have been horrified. So, including, I think there was a set of triplets there. So anyway, so they're just interesting statistics. You can add your own statistics. Nuptial confinements. So this tells you how many people. So if you've been married for 3 years, like my parents had in 1959, the average number of children they had was 2, which is exactly right with my parents. They had the 2 children, my sister and I. So that's another interesting statistics. And this one here, they were married, my parents, in 1956. So I had to go to the 1958 yearbook to get the 56 statistics. But my parents were married in the Presbyterian Church, and they were one of the 12.66% of all marriages that took place that year in Australia in a Presbyterian Church. As you can see, that was the fourth most popular marriage place. 29% were married in the Catholic Church of England, 24% with the Roman Catholic Church, 13% Methodist, and civil officers, which was probably the registry office. Only 11% of all marriages at that time were actually married outside the church, which of course these days probably the statistics would be reversed. So, and I think there's one more stat here. This tells you the conjugal condition of bridegrooms and brides. So it tells you that when my parents married in 1956, nearly 90% of all the men that were married were bachelors, and 88% of the women who married were spinsters. In fact, and 6% had already been divorced once before. So, once again, they're just interesting sort of statistics that you can add to your family story to see how typical or non-typical perhaps you or your parents were when you were born or when they were married. And we'll quickly look at that's the age of bridegrooms. Here's this girl. In 1956, 10 girls under 15 were married, and 2,200 between 15 and 19 were married. It's sort of hard to believe these days. But anyway, that's what happened in those days. Children often, well, they were children then. If you're under 15, you got married. So wouldn't be allowed these days, but that's how things have changed. Now, we'll quickly look at the Baby Health Centre annual reports. I'm not going to, I've sent the URL to Michelle so she can pass that around. I won't sort of stop sharing my screen. So they're all reports. So the first Baby Health Centre began in 1917, and from 1918 onwards, there were centres established in all areas in Victoria, and they have these annual reports available on the website, which tell you lots and lots of great information. So, for instance, this one here from 1936-37 tells you where the baby health centres were and the hours that they were open. Locally here, Garfield was open Friday 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So you'd be surprised to find that the actual first baby health centres established in the city of Case, in the Shire of Berwick or the Shire of Cranbourne were actually at Bunyip and Garfield. I don't know why they were sent there. Garfield was such a small town there, but they were the first baby health centres established. And if you go through all these annual reports, what you can find is when the baby health centre was actually established in your area. So that's really good sort of information for local history. So, for instance, in 1936-37, the baby health centre was established at Pakenham, and it also tells you in these reports that 39 individual babies were treated, plus 13 children over 2. So it's a total visit of 300 babies and 48 children. So there's sort of interesting statistics. For instance, Cranbourne, their first baby health centre wasn't established till 1945, 1946. So that's the sort of information you can get from these reports, including this here, which I think is even more exciting. You may find that your mother or your grandma was the actual president of the local baby health centre. So this is the president and honorary secretary of the Garfield Baby Health Centre in 1936-37. Mrs. Patterson was the wife of the local doctor, and Mrs. Nutting, she had a store with her husband in Garfield. This is the same report for Bunyip. Mrs. Sullivan, Mrs. Forster, Mrs. O'Leary, and you know how hard it is to get information about what women did and the role of women in society in the olden days, because most reports list only what men did. They list things like the local RSL, the local football club. It's hard to get reports about what women did. So this Baby Health Centre annual does actually list the role, does actually list a lot of women and the role they played in their local town. This is Emerald here. And finally, we'll look at Tynong. So they're a interesting source of Victorian Baby Health Centre annuals are an interesting source of statistics, in the sense that they tell you when the centre in your town was established, how many children it treated and the opening hours, but it also tells you the women who were involved in establishing the centre or were president and secretary of the local centre. And that's great information for your family research. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing. And now Jane will tell us all about crime.
Crime and punishment. This is going to cover a lot more variety than what I did a few years back, oh no, maybe 18 months ago. 18 months ago, I did convicts, exiles and criminals with a lot of websites for you to go and look at, and it's online through the Casey Cardinia Library. Follow the links to local history, and that will give you more details on the actual criminals themselves. This time I'm going to look at a broader aspect of the other people who were involved with the convicts and the exiles, particularly the police. So we start off with courts. Now, we have a police court, the children's court, that's now the family court, coroners' courts, county courts, magistrate courts, Supreme Court, and currently we have Victims of Crime Tribunal and the VCAT, which is Victoria Civil and Administration Tribunal. And all these courts have numerous people that work in them, and they have a lot of digital information that's now available relating to cases and people, depending on the severity of what's being discussed or the importance to the community. You can find digital records now, which are very interesting. So there's more than the criminal in the court. You've got a defendant and a plaintiff. You've got jurors and witnesses, judges, barristers, solicitors, clerk of the court, the sheriff, the bailiff, the inspector, the justice of the peace, the victims and the perpetrator, the magistrate, the coroner, the policeman, the policewomen, and you've also got the family members who are there to support them, and in today's world, the newspapers. So all those people have a connection, and any of those people could be connected to your family or community. So the first place to go and look for most of us is the Public Records Office. And I'm using only Victoria, but all the states have their own record office. On this side, where you've got 6 here, these 6 links are under what's categorised as justice, crime and law. Now, most of us would go to this, what's the family link, and you'll get inquests into deaths and the prison registers. You also have the situation now where a number of these documents have been digitised and they're on, say, Find My Past, or they're on Ancestry. When the contracts finish, they then become back to the Public Records Office. This happens a lot now with the amount of information that's being released for digitising and to the general public. The organisations like Ancestry and Find My Past will do the digitising. They've got the rights to have them on their website, and then when that expires, it goes back to the originator. So in cases like, also you've got a difference in the dates. So what was initially digitised and available on Find My Past is actually, there's more now on the public records. So you need to look under both areas at the Public Records Office for anything to do with the legal fraternity, whether it's the criminals or registers. You would be used to the little symbol. This one says that It's available to view in the room. The little map of the world says it's digitised and you can view it from home. And there's a huge amount of information that's available. Now, under the justice crime, there are many things listed and you think, oh, that would be interesting, but it's not digitised. Well, that means you've got to make inquiries and go in and view it in the room, get in touch with them to find out. But there is still an awful lot out there that you can now get to. So this is an example of a criminals file. This was under the Register of Male Prisoners. And this is William Roy Folwell. Now, he has, as all people who get into the legal system and they go to jail for whatever reason, they get a number. And that number then follows them every time they do something wrong. It's a bit like you will find with the police all have a service number, the same as when we have the World War I soldiers, World War II soldiers, military people today all have a service number. So that number becomes important. It's where you are looking to establish. There could be two people with the exact same name. The service number is going to tell you which one's which. It'll give you a little description of the person. It's sometimes reading, it's hard to read the writing. It'll give you dates, places where they've committed their crimes, what they've done. This one is stealing from a dwelling. But you might also find photographs. So this is William. He was born in 1913. This is the first time he actually goes into jail in 1933. He's quite a young looking person here. This is only 6 years later. He's seriously aged now. He's well and truly into his life of crime in the space of 6 years, but he doesn't actually get out of prison until 1946. So that might be the answer to your, where did this person disappear to? I'm researching my family and all of a sudden there's this gap in, he's vanished. And women as well, check into the registers for male and female prisoners. And if you go to Trove, you're looking at the originals, not a digital transcription, which is another problem you've got with Ancestry and Find My Past. Some have original images and the other people have done transcriptions, and some people have both. So somewhere like Family Search, they quite often have both a transcription and an original image. And there's lots and lots and lots of registers there with all the criminals. State Library of Victoria is another place where you can go for information to do with the legal profession. The Victorian Government Gazette. There's a what's on section or what's in section. You should read this section. It'll give you all the parameters of what's in a government gazette. So fundamentally, this is where the government is announcing the appointments, where people are being transferred to somewhere, where someone's retiring, listing things like who the trustees are at a cemetery. From a legal point of view, it gives all the listings of who the JP is, who's just been appointed as a Justice of the Peace, who the magistrates are, reports on various statistics, as Heather said, of how many court cases there were, a huge amount of information in a more general sense relating to the legal profession. There's the odd thing there where you'll come across things that you're not expecting. Ned Kelly is one. He gets in everything. If it's he just seems to be in anything to do with Victoria. If they're least bit going to talk about police, Ned Kelly's name pops up. Also, there's information in here about the appointments for the heads of the police, who the inspectors are, that side of things. But it's just a name and the appointment date. It's interesting information, and it may be the starting point to your family mystery. So as I said, in the Victorian Government Gazettes and also the Commonwealth Government Gazettes are the same. They list the things that they're in charge of. So here we've got the appointments for men who've been Justice of the Peace in Victoria for general sessions. And on the other side, it's men who've been appointed to the Clerk of Petty Sessions, and it tells you this one's in Emerald Hill and one in St Kilda. And the Victorian Government Gazette is, there's pages and pages for every year. You can just browse through them. You can search by putting a name in if you think your person or your person's a JP, and systematically work your way through all of them. And of course you get judges. So this is just two men, a father and a son, who both became judges. They also were both knighted for their service to the legal profession. And that sets you off on a little train of what else can you find out about them. So you've got things like the Australian Dictionary of Biography, which will give you a précis of a man's career and biography on him as a person. So this is William Arthur Callender Beckett. Tells us his age, that he's a barrister, tells us where he's born, who his parents are, who he marries, when he comes to Sydney, what schools he attends, that he goes into the legal profession following his father, that he returned to England at one stage for study. It's a long, probably a couple of hundred words on this gentleman, and also includes his photograph. So people who are higher up in the legal profession, if you go to the Australian Dictionary of Biography, and you can get to that via Trove, you can get the bonus of finding a photograph, but also the family history there, not just his career as a barrister. So then I found this fabulous website, which is Australasian Legal Information Institute. It's probably more geared to students studying legal at university, but it has got a lot of databases. Now, a lot of them are recent, where they're giving you response. This one here is Coroner's Court of Victoria responses in 2009. So it's background information for study, for journalists who are doing an investigation into some aspect of the law. You can do it Australia-wide, or you can just do it Victoria. I just had a look at Victoria, and it came up with a list of the Victorian case laws. And down the bottom here, we've got quite a few here in the 1800s, where you've got a lot of court cases which are now being, I guess, used as cases for students to study, cases for other lawyers to look at when they're doing things. Gives you information about legislation, outcomes of court cases. A lot of wills in the 1800s seem to, if they were disputed, would get to court. So in this case here, we've got Elizabeth Boyd. She's died, and Miller and Farr are the two people contesting the will. It's 4 pages long, but it gives you a lot of background into the lady's life, that she had a will done, that she changed it. She then died not long after she changed her will, so people contested it. And from a family history point of view, if you'd gone to Prov and you'd looked at the will online, you wouldn't necessarily know that here, if you go to this website, you can see the court case of that dispute as to who was going to get the woman's estate. So those sort of things are very interesting from a family point of view and from a local point of view, because it tells you what's happening in a community as well. So then the Police Gazette, which is a fabulous resource for so many things. Now, I've listed here, anything that's stolen, strayed or impounded in the way of livestock, Missing people will give you an identification of them, or if they're unknown, you'll find things like a man dies on the side of the road, and in the Police Gazette they'll give you a description of the body, and you can also get photographs, which is quite interesting. Then you've got deserting. It's not just deserting your family. You could be a deserter from the military, and you've got things like bigamy are in the Police Gazettes. Anytime a warrant for arrest, what the reason is, who the people are, descriptions of them. Then there's numerous causes of why people would be arrested or wanted for arrest. Robbery has a number of different categories. Your robbery under arms, which is your bushrangers, robbery with violence, robbery of a person, which is different to larceny of a house, or stealing or breaking and entering. So all those categories have their own personalities and people involved with them. You've got property, whether it's stolen, lost or found, fraud, alias names, people who are being assaulted, drunk and disorderly. You'll also get people there for what we would perceive as the normal thing the police would be dealing with, murder and manslaughter and arson and rape, they're all in there. And of course, every time there's a report, there's going to be names, physical descriptions, who the family might be, where they're residing, what their occupation is, and a lot of photos. So we'll have a look at what some of the things are you can find in the Police Gazettes. So I found it very interesting. This is New South Wales, and this is early 1900s, and the Immigration Act meant that you didn't just get white Anglo-Saxons. The Chinese that lived in Australia or were, in this case, were on a ship, and they come into port and they jump ship, and there's a reward of $15 for Li Fuk. Gives a description of him. I know it says down here that he's pigeon-toed, very noticeable, and he speaks little English, and he's dressed in a suit, and he's a fireman, and he's a prohibited immigrant. And then there's another one further down here, Ahmed Ali, who is in Newcastle. He's got a small black moustache, and he's also a fireman, but he's an Arab. He's a native of Aden, and he speaks a little English, French and Italian. So in 1912, you've got these people that you're not necessarily expecting to find in the Police Gazettes, because we still, and here, this is one of the unknown deaths. This is a man who drowned, and attached to the photograph is a long description of everything he's wearing, tells you how many teeth he's got, a description of him, the location where he's found, and a lot of background information. And it gives you the code for his first time he appears in the Gazette. So then it references back to any other descriptions in the Gazette. This one here on the left, this is up in Griffith. This is in the 1930s, which I'm guessing might have been the time of the Italian migration into the Griffith area. And this man has been charged with feloniously wounding Giuseppe with intent to murder him. And it says, for full particulars and description of the offender, see reference above quoted. So you've got all those sort of things in there, not just photographs of people who are literally in the police station. And not every person's going to have their photo taken, but it might be the only photographs you're going to find of someone who's a family member. So deserters, this case we've got on the left-hand side of the screen is foot soldiers in Melbourne in 1869. A number of them are from the 14th Foot, and they've obviously decided they've had enough of being soldiers, and it gives you description of them, that they're still wearing their regimental uniform. William Hislop is a baker by trade. Dennis Kelly is from Kings County, Ireland. Patrick's from Liverpool. He's got a couple of tattoos. One is a D and the other is a BC. and he was about to be discharged with ignominy, so meaning he had done something wrong and they thought he was a lousy soldier, so they were going to discharge him anyway, so he's just jumped the gun and deserted. So now they want to find him. And another one here who's 36, and he's also in his uniform. In Sydney, who deserted Her Majesty's ship, Thomas was born in North Berwick in Scotland, gives a brief description of him, tells you that there's a reward of £3 for his apprehension if he's found within 2 years. And there's also another reward by the New South Wales government of £5. So you could probably follow the trail and see if anybody actually apprehends him and claims £8, which in 1897 would have been a lot of money. Then you've got all the missing and escapees, people who abscond, people who go missing for whatever reason. This one is from the New South Wales Police Gazette, but it's from the Victorian Police Gazette because, as we know, people cross the borders. So don't think that you only have to look at your Victorian Police Gazettes because New South Wales had the information, and also South Australia. It was like a newspaper for the police. Someone's missing in Melbourne or done a crime in Melbourne, so send it out to everybody else to try and find them. And sometimes that will be a clue for you as to where else to look. So this is 2 men that have jumped ship. Belfast Circuit, which is actually Port Fairy in Victoria at the time. And it's ascertained that Kendall has gone on to Sydney. Then you've got escaped prisoners. This is Richard Henderson, who is in charge. He's been charged with attempted rape, and he's in the lockup in Cranbourne, and it gives a nice description of him, that he's got rather thick lips and regular teeth, and he's got a short nose. It's a very, very in-depth description of him. Says he's a labourer and roughly where they think he might have gone to. So that gives you an idea of, okay, so maybe I need to look for this man down in Gippsland. And I didn't know he'd been in jail because he was only on charge. He may not have done it, but it's a starting point for your research. And then missing could be old, they could be young, male and female. So here we have a young girl who's 17. By the description of her clothing, she's dressed in a blue serge dress, a white blouse, a blue serge jacket, a black silk tie and a black straw hat. She's possibly working and has not come home from work. And Richard could be her father, or Richard could be a brother, and he works for the Jackson Steamship Company at Circular Quay, and he's looking for Minnie. Then we've got a gentleman who, he's 43, he's got a fair moustache, he wears a sack suit, he's a native of Victoria and a shoemaker, and his wife is looking for him, and he's living, well, he was living with his wife in Station Street, Arncliffe in Sydney. Or we've got Mrs. Neville, whose maiden name is Henry. She's from Port Melbourne. She's now in Sydney. There's no description given of her, but her mother is looking for her, and it tells you who her mother is and where she lives in Melbourne. So that's from a Sydney Police Gazette. It would possibly be duplicated in the Melbourne Gazette as well. Then we've got stories about bigamy, where the man, he gives you the information that he's married in Northumbria, what date he married, what her name was, that he came to Sydney and he married again when the other lady was still alive, gives a description of him, and that he's a water plumber and he may be seeking employment on a coastal steamer. There's a warrant of arrest here for Joseph McDowell for failing to make adequate provision for an impending birth, gives you his age, gives you a description of him, that he was recently a probationary constable in the police force, and he was recently stationed in Queanbeyan, and they believe he left by train, and they give you a description. He's got a wooden trunk and a brown leather portmanteau, and his arrest is very desirable. So giving you more information, not just about the fact that it's he's absconded off this poor woman and left her about to give birth. He's obviously had some training in the police force, so I wonder if they ever found him. And of course, you've got murders, as you would think in a Police Gazette. This is the murder of Frederick and Annie Sheard at Beaconsfield. These are probably more blunt than you would get in a newspaper report. And this is actually from the Victorian Police Gazette, and gives a description of their wounds. And this was only about 48 hours after the actual discovery of the bodies. So as you go through the Police Gazette, there's more and more information there of the people they're looking for. And then, of course, you go and look at the newspaper reports and coroner's reports and find out more about the situation. In the war years, in World War I, a lot of policemen joined the military, and it created some problems. So here is a case in New South Wales where the police in Sydney are looking for constables, mounted or foot, who can act as stable guards and barrack guards and assist with general duties. And it's suitable for men of advanced years and unlikely to secure further promotion whilst employed. And it was a case of when the war took so many of our young men away, it was the older men who stepped into the breach. And some of them had obviously had previous police experience. So in Victoria, there was 138 policemen enlisted, 17 of them killed in action, 10 died of wounds, and 102 re-enlisted in the police force when they returned. And one of the men who didn't re-enlist told the police that he had had a serious break in his leg during his war service and didn't feel he was going to be able to withstand the constant use of his leg in his police duties. Also, many soldiers who returned from the war enlisted in the police force when they came back. So Mounted Constable 6391, Frederick William Castle, he's one of them, and he was stationed at Cranbourne in 1930. And in our cemetery walk a couple of months back, we highlighted Frederick's service in the war, his service in the police force, and the death of his wife at the Cranbourne police station. Promotions and appointments, you can find these in the gazettes. You can find them whether you're looking in the Police Gazette or a Commonwealth Gazette or a Victorian State Gazette. This case, it's telling us that the first constable is going to be an assistant registrar of births, deaths and marriages. And you go, oh, okay. It's showing you that a policeman wasn't just out there doing crime, he had a number of other responsibilities. And in this case, Mr. Jorgensen is replacing Mr. Halliday because he's going on holidays. It gives you a broader idea of what the police were doing. Down here, we've got the fact that there's now a whole list of police who are now involved with the Liquor Act and the licensing. So the policeman might be sitting in his desk, or not in his desk, in his cabin or his house or his whatever. He had to do more than just look after the baddies, I guess is the word, or hunt for the bushrangers. They were the registrar for birth, deaths and marriages. They did licensing districts. They were sanitation. They were involved with children not being at school. There was a lot more to their job in the community. So inspectors of slaughterhouses, you can find the information. Again, it gives you the name of the constable, what his service number is, which is again really important, because if you weren't sure about what else he's done, you could just simply Google Thomas McGrath 2371 constable and you'll get an amazing amount of results, because it's looking for him as a policeman. And the police were also involved with things like the police auctions, which we still have today, where they've got goods that they've confiscated for whatever reason. So this one is from 1873 up at the Avoca police station, and they're going to auction off 7 bottles of brandy, 5 bottles of ale, 5 bottles of porter, 8 bottles of colonial wine and a keg of beer. And it's advertised in the Police Gazette, and it would also be in the local paper. The Court of Insolvency at Sandhurst also is listed in Police Gazettes, telling us that Ellen Elizabeth Kelsall is a school mistress. She somehow got herself into a financial situation, and they're asking for people to come forward if they have debts owed to them by Elizabeth. So you'll get a lot of that sort of information in the Police Gazettes. And then there's recruiting. This one happens to be from the 1960s, and they're recruiting young constables and policewomen to work in the Northern Territory. This is from the Commonwealth Government Gazette. It's telling me that the men have to be 21 to 30 with an upper age group of 35 if they've already had police experience. The women could be 25 to 35, except if they've had previous service, and then they could be out of that range. Gives you what their qualifications are, what we would like them to be height-wise, where they can get their application forms, and then you can follow through the gazettes and see who actually finishes up in the Northern Territory, and gives you an idea of what the range of their salary could be, and they get a way allowance for going to the Northern Territory and a shift allowance. 1960s, so it could be a relative of yours and you finding out what their life was up in the Northern Territory as a policeman and what they had to do. Civilian appointments to the Commonwealth Police are also in there, and you'll get civilian appointments to the police force in the Victorian Government Gazette and in the Police Gazettes. And here is a young woman, she's a typist. She's been assigned to the Commonwealth Police Force, gives you her full name, and that she's got in the 4th Division as a typist. So you'll get lots of things like that. And then, of course, in the future, if she gets a promotion, her name will come up in another gazette. Newspapers. Newspapers are our main go-to for filling out the information, bearing in mind, like most things, if you're looking at something in the newspaper that is police related, it's going to not necessarily have his name as in Christian names or even the initials, because he would be known in the community as Constable Golding. And this particular report is quite a long report on his farewell and how things he was given, the different members of the community who spoke about how good he was in the community, how important he was, what gifts were given to him and to his wife, and that he was going down to take charge of the Moe police station. So then you would go looking in the Moe newspapers to see him arriving at Moe. The police farewells were a remarkable example of how important the police constable was in a smaller rural community. They involved themselves with the sporting organisations, they involved themselves with the schools, their wives were involved in the community. Again, you don't find out what Constable Golding's wife's name is, she's just referred to as Mrs. Golding, but it is giving you a broader idea of what the policeman's life was like. Quite often you'll find things about his promotions, you'll find reports of him being involved in apprehending criminals, you'll find reports of him in court cases, giving his evidence. So the newspapers really enlarge the story in the regional and rural. Even in Melbourne metropolitan area, you'll find a lot of information because you've got more avenues for the journalists to get to the police courts and get the, I guess, the salacious information to give out to the public in their newspaper in the morning. They can read about a woman having a fight and a struggle because she didn't want to be apprehended because she was drunk. and that's going to get into the newspaper with her name and the constable's name. Trove also gives you all the magazines where you can find information. This is, and it says here, the police headquarters in Darwin in 1870. And the photograph was taken by this gentleman, Inspector Foulash. And you think, well, he was obviously very happy with his headquarters because he took a photograph of them. And this photograph is in the Woman's Weekly, which you wouldn't necessarily expect to find. But you have to look at the time frame of the Woman's Weekly in the 1930s, was looking at the broader aspect of Australia's community. So this was part of an article about people in the Darwin area. And it came up with these two fabulous photographs. Local police courts get reported in the newspapers. This is the Cranbourne Police Court, and it's a man arguing with another man about splitting wood and land and who owned what and their lease and when it expired. And of course it went to court, so it's telling you who the chairman of the court is, the names of the JPs. So in this case there's 3 JPs. Mr. Patterson is one of them. Who the surnames of the 2 defendant and the plaintiff, and it's Mr. Tucker, it's his lease. So it's giving you a lot of information about people involved in that court case. The Dandenong Police Court case, this is 1918. Again, it's telling us who the chairman is, who the JPs are, who the inspector is, who the policeman is, and who he's charging, which is William Taylor, who's the licensee of the Motor Club Hotel, and he has been caught serving liquor to persons who were not lodgers or bona fide travellers out of his licensed hours. Tells us that Mr. Brayshaw is the lawyer acting for the defendant. Constable Armstrong is the policeman who was in the hotel that night. Further on, it tells us who the 4 men who are in there drinking out of hours, names them, one of them being John Ridgway. Tells us that John Ridgway wasn't drinking, but he had paid for the friend to have a drink, so therefore he and his friend were both fined £5 each. So it gives you more information other than just the licensee was fined for serving out of hours. Broadens the idea of what's happening in the community and the number of people involved in that simple court case. Police contractors can be found in the newspapers and in the gazettes. This case is a lot of different people who've been contracted to build fencing. First one is fence a police paddock in Bullock Creek at 8 shillings a rod. There's repairs and additional fencing in Gisborne. Mr. Adams is building quarters and staving for the police at Lancefield. He's going to earn £174. You can also find things like the man who had the contract to supply the bread to Pentridge Prison at £1 loaf was supplied at the cost of 1.5 pence. It gives you an idea of the other people who were involved. So where we think of people as being just labourers or someone's listed as a contractor, a lot of these people were contracting to build the police barracks. Here's one, Thomas Grimwald. He's going to supply the bluestone at the new military barracks, £135. So he's a stonemason. This one, Mr. Chambers, is going to construct a wooden lockup at Steglitz. So all that information is in the police gazettes and also sometimes in the newspapers to broaden out what family are doing. As I said, following the service number is important. When they got to the detective class, their service number is not listed in the gazettes. It's only on their record, their individual service file. As when they're constables and footmen, then service number is going to be everywhere. So these are men who've been promoted. It also gives you resignations. So Michael Duffy was a constable. His number is 198. So he's obviously been in the force for some time, and he's resigned from the police service. And as you can see, their newer numbers, they're up 1,400. So the police service is definitely growing, and you follow that service number for the man's records. And where would you go for that? Well, the Victorian Police Museum and the Victorian Police Historical Unit. Unfortunately, the museum at the moment is closed. It's supposedly going to reopen at the end of this year. But the Police Museum has the service records for 1855 to 1989. Now, they've been digitised up to 1956, and I'm assuming once the building is reopened, you would be able to go in and maybe access them there, but there are other ways around it. The service record is going to give you a description of the person, when they joined, their service number, whether they're married or single, and it will give you a list of all their transfers, their promotions, and some of the ones that have been digitised are already available through other venues, which I'll get to. So what you'll get is, this is Charles Alfred Taylor. Again, there's his service number, a photograph of him. When he joined the service, he was single, and here they've written the date that he gets married. It's updated. It's handwriting by numerous different people in numerous different pens and whatever. It is hard to read, but you can zoom in on them and try and enlarge it up. So he started here in the Burke district in 1908. It gives, and his service record, I think, was about 3 pages long. So Victorian Collections is one place you can go to, and it has got service records randomly in there. If you just put in the word police, you'll get nearly 2,000 results. You have to go through them. There's documents, there's photographs of police stations, memorabilia, that sort of thing. Also at Victoria's Museum, on their website, they've got a similar collection relating to the police. Again, it depends on who got what when. The Victorian Museum has got a lot of photographs of the police force in the 1970s, which have come from a photographer, not from the police force, somebody who just was photographing police. So on Victorian Collections, they've got randomly either records for criminals or the record of conduct and service for the police. This lady here was a career policewoman. It shows her promotions, gives you her description, a nice photograph of her, and as you've got her service number here, you could potentially find out more information about what she did and when she did. The same with this particular file I found interesting. Its heading is English speaking races, 5'5" and under. And I thought, what an interesting way to file things. It's got his photograph, what he's done. He's for manslaughter, and he's getting 5 years, a description of him. So potentially through the public records and through the police, there is more information, and there would be, as it's manslaughter, information in the newspapers, but you've got a photograph of William. So the Victorian Police Historical Society, their website has got a bit of information there that can help you. It's got their historical publication, which was their journal, and they're not digitised yet, but they're in the process of doing it. And you may be able to find those journals in family history associations, libraries, other places. And those journals have very good stories about specifics of being a policeman, what it was to have a career in the mounted police, or a career with the motorbikes, or detectives. All that sort of information is in the historical unit, and the fact that these historical unit are available to give lectures at meetings and promote the history of the police force. So the Narre Warren District Family History, we have a number of fabulous records for the police, predominantly Victoria, but the Police Gazettes that are online is New South Wales and Victoria, some of, whereas we've managed to accumulate over time all the Police Gazettes that are digitised and available for Queensland, South Australia, etc. We've also got things like the South Geelong Police Charge Book. It's only for a few years, but your person could be in Geelong and you can look at the charge book and see what's recorded for that person. And the charge book would be not just criminals, it would be drunk and disorderly, resisting arrest, petty crimes. Those sort of things would go into the charge book because the person is going to be in the cells overnight for however long. Police depositions is where the policeman's giving his report on an incident. Again, it's going to give you information about an event and a person. We've got the police magazines. We've got quite a few of them in the room. There's also books and there's microfiche. So this is the gazettes that we've got. Now, the Victorian ones, we're missing 7 years. They're not consecutive. They're odd years in the 1960s and 70s. New South Wales, the digitised ones we've got is actually 4 years more than what's available on Trove. And we've got Queensland, Tassie, South Australia, the journals, and and we've also got some microfiche specifically dealing with the police and their records. And of course, that databases are what we use, but we have to be aware that some databases will have the image, some will have the index, and some will have a transcription. So you want to look at an original image first, and if it's very hard to read or you're not capable of understanding the old cursive writing, you could then look for a transcription. Family Search is now free in the Narre Warren Family History Group's room, and it's got a lot of police records and crime, legal documents that you can access through Family Search. Ancestry and Find My Past is through Casey Cardinia Libraries. Again, you've got the case of Ancestry might have the index and Find My Past has got the original. You need to look at both. And public records and archives, a lot of them are now online and free in each state. So you want to work your way through all those, looking for your policeman or your lawyer or your county clerk or your justice of the peace. They're going to pop up through all those various places. But the photos that I've used have come from our online National Archives, Public Record, Trove. It's just an example of some of the things you can find. And this is one of my favourite photographs, which came via Trove. This is the Queensland Police Magistrate, Queensland Police Inspector, the Hughenden officers at their tracker in 1920. And I thought, how amazing to have, that broad cross-section of men in the police force. This one looks so young, and he's obviously been there for a while. He's quite stern, and people have actually identified some of the people, and there's a service number as well. So it's a bonus when you find those sort of things. So unlike Heather, I wasn't a very organised person today, and I haven't done a handout, but if anybody wants to get in touch through Michelle or through me through the Narre Warren District Family History Group for the places I went, although they're all very logical, except for the very interesting Australasian legal index, I'll be happy to help. And that's it for me. Thank you.